everyone, I'm Tamanna from Whatfix, and I hope you are really enjoying these knowledge packed episodes of the Digital Adoption Show Season 2. These episodes are coming out so well just because of the love and the reviews that you guys have shared with us. In Season 2, Episode 14, we have our special guest, Stella Collins, who's the co-founder and CLO of Stella Labs, along with Ajay Kumar, who's the VP Pre-Sales at Whatfix. And you must listen to this episode because this episode has a lot of knowledge around the power of doing with neuroscience. And I'm sure you're going to love it because I personally liked it a lot.
My name is Ajay and I'm your host for the day for this podcast on Learn the Power of Doing with Neuroscience. Now, what exactly to do with neuroscience is something that we'll discuss with Stella Collins. I have Stella Collins with me, who has written a critically acclaimed book on neurosciences for learning and development. But before that, allow me to introduce myself. As I said, my name is Ajay, and I've been working in IT industry for the last about 22, 23 years, mostly on the business application side. My job has been to train people on business applications, to implement business applications, and to also do solutioning for large set of customers on business applications. I have with me Stella, as I said today, and I will request Stella to introduce herself.
Hello, nice to be here with you today, Ajay. I'm Stella Collins. I'm Chief Learning Officer and co-founder of Stella Labs. We're a learning specialist company, and we're currently building a platform that is AI-enabled, fueled by neuroscience, and its mission is to beat the upskilling gap and make sure that everybody kind of has the skills they need for the future.
All right, great. Thank you, Stella, for the introduction. I'll straight away put you in the hot seat and start asking you some questions that I'm sure our listeners would really love to hear the answers from you. When you see your profile for the last 20, 25 years, Stella, you have been working in different fields. You have started your career probably in the psychology function, then you moved to IT, then you moved to learning and development, and now you've started a company and started a tech solution for learning and development. Great changes in career. How did that happen?
It's been slightly more than 20 years too, I better tell you that. I studied psychology at university and I absolutely loved it. But one of the things we had to do, I think it was in our first or second year at university, was we had to do a course on IT. And at that point, I had never even seen a computer before, or, I knew very little about them. We had to do a course and I can still remember it. We had to we had to program something so that it could draw a Christmas tree. And I thought, this is so stupid and pointless. I've got much better things to do with my time. Really put off the whole computing world. Went on to do a master's in human communication and did a project on computer aids for people with speech disabilities. And thought, this is why we need computers. They're actually really useful for people because they can actually solve real world problems. So then I got interested in IT. At that point in the 1980s, there were a lot of jobs in IT. So I took a job in IT. I was a programmer, I was a coder, I was an analyst. And did a lot of stuff on system support and got really into computing, and then kind of accidentally got a job as training support and training and system support manager. Didn't want to have anything to do with the training because I was now an IT person, but kind of one thing led to another, and I realized that training was psychology again. So it brought me back to my psychology. So I had 20 years running my own business in the UK, training people. We use digital technology to help us. And then in the last 2.5 years have joined Stella Labs here in Belgium. And that's our mission, is to build some learning tech that really, really works using kind of the psychology and the neuroscience of learning embedded into it.
Brilliant. So I'm sure you would have been able to put a lot of things that you yourself experienced in the tech industry when you moved in and became a learning professional, right? You probably would have been able to understand exactly what people need on the ground and design something around that. What exactly are your thoughts on a corporate learning and development platform, or an entire execution of the learning and development as a function? And the tool that your organization has built, how does that tool follow the philosophy that you yourself have developed over the years for learning and development?
So I think learning development people on the whole are incredibly helpful. They really want to do a good job. I think they are developing and improving their own skills as they realize that the world is changing. Training at work is nowhere near like it used to be. So I think they're doing that. There's still a lot of work to be done there. So I think we need to get much better at being able to show impact and return on investment. We get a little bit involved in, doesn't the training look good? Don't we feel good? Do the learners feel good? But actually, have they actually changed their behavior at work? And not all the time has that happened. So that's really important. I think we need to be more credible and professional. It's very easy. You can just become a trainer. Nobody ever asks you, have you got a qualification? Or you can do it without a qualification. So I think not necessarily needing more qualifications, but I think we need to be more professional about it. And I think that's where having an understanding of the science of learning can add to that credibility and professionalism. We need to be much more connected into the business, because gone are the days when learning and development kind of sat in an ivory tower and could create content and just hope that people wanted it, or create courses and just hope that people would choose them, which did used to happen. We need to be part of the business, and I think we need to involve the business much more in the whole concept of supporting people. I mean, learning is all about performance, really. It's about, can people do their jobs more effectively, better, with more joy? And I think that's where we need to be, is how can we facilitate that to happen within the organization without it necessarily having to be us that has, control and influence over it all the time. So I think that's really good. And we need to stop wasting time on things that don't work. So we need to make sure we're focusing on things that do work. And then you did ask me a question, how does our platform do that? That was a very good question. Because we've built our platform really thinking about how does learning really happen for people? People, first of all, need to be motivated. So our platform is built with nudges built into it so people feel motivated. Learning is a journey across time. So we're not just coming along and going, here's some content, here's an event. Hey, presto, you've got it. We support people through a learning process, which involves some information, some guidance, but also people need to then, kind of experiment with that, to test and feel comfortable with it. They need to practice, and our platform supports them in practice. And it supports them getting feedback from managers or peers to say, well, actually, you practiced that thing, and actually, you look like you're doing pretty well. You're actually implementing those skills in the workplace. And this kind of idea of transferring learning, from the training classroom into the workplace. So a lot of what our platform does is it nudges people at work to practice their new skills, get feedback on their new skills, and to keep developing those new skills. So it stretches things over time. And then it's very much designed with, a really smart algorithm to actually support people both with retention of knowledge, but the retention of skills. So kind of spaced practice is part of what's built into it.
Okay, so let me get this straight, if I understand it correctly. Number one is experiment with different ideas, experiment with probably different ways of delivering trainings.
Number one, AJ, is actually get motivated first.
Yes, of course.
Have people motivated, because unless they're motivated, and they have to be kept motivated through that process. Because learning, there are times in learning when you can feel really frustrated. I spoke to somebody yesterday and she said, I'm so stuck. I've been learning, I'm living in the Netherlands, I'm living in Belgium, so we're learning Dutch. I'm so stuck because I'm not learning anything new. Now she is, but she's kind of reached a plateau. So she's right now feeling frustrated. So she needs something to keep her going, to get her through to that next part of the journey. So motivation is always, for me, one of the first things to think about.
Absolutely. Completely agree with you. So motivation, experimentation, ensure that it is outcome based. It is not just another activity or task that you're delivering. It is outcome based, and the outcome should be measurable. And of course, as usual, have fun while doing it.
Indeed. It should be enjoyable. Yes, it should. So you should feel like you're making progress.
Is this what your book also talks about? Can you tell me something about it?
Indeed. So so the book is, it's kind of a lot. The reason I have this new role 2.5 years in now is because my co-founder discovered me by reading my book. And my book is about the science of learning. So it is, it's heavily scientific. But for me, it's important that what does that mean? If we understand how we learn, what's the practical application of that? So the book is very practical. It's kind of, this is, if neuroplasticity is the way we learn, then what does that mean for us in our jobs as L&D, whether we're trainers or designers, whether we're delivering or we're kind of supporting learning? What does that mean for us? So it's science, very science-based, but the science is explained in a simplish, fairly simple way. It's not too in-depth, but I kind of lead people on a journey. So they, get a bit at the beginning and then they build on it. And then it's all about, so what does this mean? What does this mean we need to do in our real jobs of training, whether that's training digitally, whether it's face-to-face, whether you're designing e-learning, it's practical.
Brilliant. Let me try to make it slightly more heavy. In the modern enterprise, where do you see the learning and development function sitting? It has traditionally been, at least what I have observed, is a lot of times part of the HR function. Is this where it sits, or do you see something else for the learning and development function?
I think it shouldn't sit within HR, and I think it traditionally sits in HR because I think both HR and L&D have evolved to be different. And I'm not an HR specialist by any stretch, but I think HR now is very much involved in kind of the experience of being at work. Are you getting paid well? Are your rules and regulations right? It's a more transactional process, I think, HR. In the UK, L&D and HR have become far more separate, whereas where I am in Europe, they are more together. But I think what we need to do is to have L&D emerge as very much as a business partner with the business. We should be out talking to the business saying, what do you need? What do you need your people to be able to do? And how can we support you in enabling that to happen? And that doesn't mean we necessarily need to teach your people, because if they're learning Java or they're learning some kind of cybersecurity coding, we in L&D can't do that, but we can perhaps support the process so that those experts within the business who have the skills and have the knowledge and can teach the next people coming along, how can we support them to do that? So I think we very much need to be embedded as part of the business rather than being a sort of, I think I said earlier on, a sort of separate ivory tower where we kind of look on it from afar. And I think also one of the things we can do is I think, technical people tend to think that their technical employees need to have all those technical skills, and they kind of forget that actually they still need to communicate well, they still need to influence or persuade or negotiate. And I think where L&D can come in is to say, well, actually, we can support both sets of skills. We can support those soft skills and the hard skills, because they, as they're so-called technical skills, because they actually go together, they fit together very well. So I think that's a role where we can kind of influence and persuade people to help them understand the connection between, when you're doing a job, you need a whole set of complex skills. It's not just the job skills. You need the other skills that enable you to completely do your job, that more rounded base. So I think that's where we can support there.
That's an interesting thought. You said 2 or 3 very interesting things. One is learning and development has to be part of the business. The second thing that I just picked up was that you need to have a few non-job related skills to be able to do your job well, right? And I find that very, very interesting. And you probably have answered most of this, but still want to very specifically ask you, when you say become part of the business, how do you see learning and development becoming part of the business? And more importantly, not just influence the people on the field, but how do you also influence better outcome from the people who are in the field through learning and development?
I think the first thing we need to do is to stop taking orders. And you hear this a lot in L&D, that, in the past, a manager comes to you, or a team leader, or, an organization head comes to you and says, we've got all these people and we think they need to learn X, Y, or Z. Time management is a classic. And in the past, we would have said, and I've done this myself, oh, right, okay, we'll write a time management course and we'll deliver that to you. But actually, that's not usually what's required, because it's not usually a time management issue. There's usually, there's a management problem, or there's a process challenge that's stopping people from getting their jobs done and doing things when they need to do them. So I think we need to be much better at going back to the business and saying, okay, let's understand the situation a bit more. Let's do a bit more analysis as to what's actually going on here. There'll be some elements where you can change a process, or there'll be some elements where you may need to change some people, or there'll be some elements where, training will actually help people. And I think we need to get much better at identifying where is training the answer and where is it not the answer. I mean, I'm certainly not the first person to have said this. But I think we need to get better at that. And then really when organizations or when senior people sort of say, okay, so we've understood training is, can you just train them in time management or whatever it might be? Well, what do you actually want to see differently? So we need to go back to them and say, well, you tell us the outcomes you're looking for that are going to support your business needs, and we can then train with those in mind. But we need you to be really clear about your business needs and not just have them say, oh, they need to understand X, Y, or Z. No, what do people really need to be able to do in order to fulfill the business needs that you have. So I think that's our first job, is to stop saying yes and to start asking more questions.
Yeah, probably stop asking how and probably start asking why.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I get that message very clearly, very, very strongly. Coach the people who are coachable and don't worry about the rest, right? Probably. But having said that, look, you're probably transforming your years and years and years of experience of learning and development into technical solutions. So let me ask this. Coming from the technical world myself, businesses are going global, right? Almost every business is going global. You will find companies working in all different geographies, which means users of the business applications within an organization are also widely dispersed. There are multiple cultures, there are multiple ethnic backgrounds, there are multiple languages that come into play. In a situation like this, how do you see tech solving the new challenge that learning and development teams have?
That's a really interesting question. And not one where I'm an expert by any means, but I suspect AI has some solutions in there somewhere. If we think about the language challenges, we know that things like DeepL and I can't even remember what it's called, the Google Translate, for instance, they're getting much more sophisticated. There are other, I'm quite sure, far more sophisticated programs that can actually translate in real time. So, something's written in one language and it can be translated into another. So I suspect that's probably going to be useful. I'm quite curious, actually, because I live here in Belgium and there are 3 languages that are spoken as official languages in Belgium. But actually the language that almost everybody speaks, that they actually communicate through if they're working in certainly a national or an international company, is English. But I'm very curious because I recognize that that's a very English-centric way of seeing the world. And, in Asia, how does that work? Are people using English as a language, or is it, are we just all going to learn to speak English, or are we going to need tools that actually help us translate?
So, Stella, translation probably just part of the question that I asked. And to your point, most of the Asia Pacific region uses English as the business language, especially the organizations that want to go global.
Yeah.
You can't escape that. So language becomes a lesser problem. The language, the accent, or probably, the different ways the same language is spoken probably differently in different parts of the world. That could be one of the challenges, but language per se may not be such a huge issue. The difference is the way people learn. And that is based on the way they have grown up learning, right? So some cultures may be very strict classroom kind of environment, a teacher teaching. Another culture could be here are the videos. Maybe a third culture does it absolutely different. And that's where my question is that when we reach out, objective is the same. The organization objective with everyone is the same. But the way these people are going to absorb what the organization wants to teach is going to be different. And if you have any thoughts on that.
And that's actually a much more interesting question, isn't it, of course? I think in some ways, learning actually happens the same in most people's brains at a very high level. Learning is the formation of new networks, new connections, and the ability to, perform new tasks, perform new skills, hold information in your head. And actually, as humans, that's universal. That isn't cultural. So there is a level at which it's exactly the same. And I think what we can start doing is perhaps educating our organizations and our people that, learning is a universal human talent. And how can we build on that most naturally and use more natural ways of training? So the form of training that, perhaps is very formal and we give lectures, it's not a very effective way of training. So one way of doing it is, I think, to start educating people. And I think the other way is to start measuring. So, if you try it this way, is that as effective as if you try it that way? So maybe some, within one geographical area or one kind of ethnic area, maybe you try 2 groups and say, well, which one has actually succeeded with learning better? So maybe that's one way to do it. It's actually to use that kind of experimental approach to see what works better. And I think also to rely on the fact that learners do people kind of do know how they learn. There's a lot of myths around learning, but they kind of know when they learn informally, they kind of know what works for them and what doesn't work for them. So using that approach and giving them choices about, right now you can do this, you can watch a video, or you could go and talk to a colleague. Which would you prefer? Give them the choice. So something around choices, education, and experimentation, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I agree with you. And as you said, human beings are probably tuned to the idea of learning new things right from the beginning. I guess right from the beginning, other than breathe in and breathe out, everything else is an acquired skill. And
Yes,
somehow
indeed.
we have all picked up those skills.
Yes.
So there is an inbuilt mechanism in all human beings to be able to learn new things. The only thing one has to figure out is what works best in a given situation. I agree with that. So since I went back to the starting of the childhood, let me try to make it a bit lighter. After having spent so much time in the corporate world, right, and it is a tough world, do you still think that you retain the child in you? And if yes, what is that one childish thing that you still like?
I definitely still have the child in me. And I absolutely know that because I have a 1.5-year-old grandson, and I don't see him regularly because he's in the UK and I'm in Belgium. But as soon as I get to his house or he comes to mine, I'm on the floor with him. We're playing games. I'm pushing cars with him. We're playing instruments. We're playing make-believe. So I think for me, playing and genuinely playing just for the joy of it is probably the one thing that's stuck with me, and I love doing it.
All right, so let's play a few questions, if you will. Questions that typically a response coming from a child is going to be extremely different as compared to the response coming from an adult. So let me ask you a few questions around that. Say you are, for whatever way, transported to Mars. You're a Martian, okay? And you see this planet called this pale blue dot, and you see a lot of problems. I saw a cartoon recently that say, the Earth is sort of boiling away, and the Martians saying they're warming up to us. Right? So how will you look at Earth, and how will as a Martian you solve Earth's problems?
I actually have quite a strong opinion on this sort of question. I actually think the Martian should go back to Mars or stay in Mars and sort his own problems out rather than trying to advise everybody else. I think as humans, we have a lot of challenges we need to fix here, and we shouldn't be looking at, what are we going to do in Mars? What are we going to do somewhere else? We should start here. So I'd actually suggest to the Martian he just stayed home and worked on his own challenges.
Solve your own problems, Mats.
Yes.
It's like that T-shirt, Dear Mats, grow up and solve your own problems.
Yes.
Okay.
If he was going to advise us, then I would suggest perhaps he came with a coaching approach.
Yes. Okay, just let me continue on this trajectory for probably a couple of more minutes. What do you think is the color of money?
Oh, I think these days it depends on the color of your credit card.
Yeah.
Money's multicolored, isn't it? Every country you go to has different colored money. So, yeah.
Yeah, I relate that with the color of the bank statement that I get, because it's all digital now.
Yes, indeed.
Right? And one last one. Let me just ask you one last childish question. You have an elephant. You can't sell it. You can't give it away. And you are living in your apartment. What will you do with that?
I'm given an elephant now, and I'm living in my apartment. Crumbs. I would take it outside and see if anybody would like a ride on my elephant. And then I would find out what the elephant liked to eat and see if I could find anything to feed it and water it with. I think I'd have to take it step by, they talk about this thing about, eat the elephant piece by piece. I think I'd have to take it piece by piece and just, first of all, take out, well, it would have to be outside. It wouldn't fit in my apartment. Take it outside, feed it, water it, and see if anybody wanted to ride it. And then we'd see what happened after that.
So going back to your philosophy of learning with experimentation.
Yes, indeed.
By the elephants love bananas and sugarcane.
Okay, probably quite hard to get hold of sugarcane in Belgium, but I know we can get hold of bananas. So it's coming to the supermarket with me.
All right. So that's it. That's it for today, Stella. I don't want to bore you further with all these childish questions, but any last few words of advice for our listeners?
So first of all, I thought they were great questions. Thank you very much. I enjoyed those. Further advice, I think just be open to experimentation, be open to ideas, and always, in terms of thinking about learning, think about it from your learner's point of view. What is it they need? And what is it in kind of linked to them? What is it the organization needs? So what does your learner need to be able to do? And how can you best help them achieve that?
All right, brilliant. Thank you very much, Stella. For me, of course, it's not that in the last 30 minutes I've become an expert on the process. But for me, a few very critical takeaways are that, as you said, have the right intent to figure out what the learning outcome has to be. Learning for the sake of learning is irrelevant. Figure out what do you want at the end of it, right? Mm-hmm. And with that, figure out and experiment with different ways of delivering that learning to users or people and see what works best for a given set of people. So these are, for me, the key learnings. Stella, really appreciate your time. Thank you very, very much for sharing your wisdom and sharing your experience with us. I'm sure I'm going to grab a copy of Neuroscience and go through this, because I also have to manage teams and I have to figure out how to coach and how to train them. So I'm going to grab a copy of that and see how I can use some of the things that you said in that. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Oh wow, such an amazing episode. I never realized there's a science behind learning in an organization as well. Thanks a lot, Stella and Ajay. This episode was quite a fun. Thanks a lot, our listeners, to listening to this episode. And stay tuned for more such episodes. And do share your reviews with us.
Yeah.